Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone across the globe joining us today. This is Bridget from Acquia. Today's webinar is Drupal 9 is coming, how should you prepare? With Dries and Gábor Hojtsy from Acquia. Just a couple housekeeping items before we get started. If you have any audio issues, please send them in the Q&A tab and I will assist you. If you have any questions for the presenters, please submit them in the Q&A tab as well, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. Slides and the recording of this webinar will be posted to acquia.com and also sent to you via email within the next few days. And without further ado, I will pass it over to Dries.
All right, thank you. Thanks for joining in with so many people. I think it's a lot of people that joined today, so it's pretty exciting. Means it's a good topic. So this will be presented by myself and Gábor. Maybe Gábor, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Gábor Hojtsy. I work as a principal Drupal developer at Acquia for the past almost 12 years now. And I'm also a Drupal Core product manager and have been with Drupal for 16 years.
Yeah, that's amazing. Myself, I'm Dries. I started the Drupal project about 18 years ago. I'm still the project lead today. I've been working with Gábor for a very long time. While I started Drupal as a hobby project, I did that for 7 years as a hobby project, and then I co-founded Acquia. Actually, Gábor was, I believe you were the very first hire, Gábor. So Gábor's been with Acquia for a very long time, as he mentioned. And so we're very excited to jointly present this webinar and to talk a little bit about Drupal 9. Before we jump into the Drupal 9 topic, we wanted to give you a quick 5-minute overview of Acquia. So as I mentioned, we started the company now almost 12 years ago, and the vision was originally to be to Drupal what Red Hat was to Linux, and to really help large organizations, typically enterprise organizations, to be successful with Drupal. That has evolved over time. We do a lot more than the original commercial support. We've expanded what we do. We added more products and services, but we've grown the company to over $200 million in revenue. We're actually close to 1,000 employees right now, I believe. And so we've been a very fast-growing company and are doing quite well. So a lot of reasons why organizations choose Acquia or choose to work with Acquia. Obviously, as a CMS platform in the cloud, we were born out of open source. All of our customers use Drupal, and we're also born in the cloud. Since the early days, we have built a cloud delivery platform, and so it puts us in a very unique position in the market compared to our proprietary competitors, because we're the only sort of enterprise-ready, open source and cloud-native solution. And people love what we do because the combination of open source and cloud is very powerful. It gives them freedom to do what they want to do, to build the sites that they can dream of, if you will. It also gives them a lot of opportunity to innovate because they're not shackled by APIs. It gives them agility and speed to market. And then obviously you get a lot of the other benefits of open source and cloud, such as flexibility and cost efficiency. So we've been pretty disruptive in the traditional web content management market. And I think it's really through that combination of open source and cloud. Our vision as a company, and this has been our vision for quite some time, is to deliver the universal platform for building the world's greatest digital experiences. And to do so, we have been building out this platform, and you can see a high-level overview here, but it's roughly divided in 2 parts. At the bottom, you see the Experience Factory, where we have products like Acquia Cloud and Site Factory, with lots of different tooling and services around it that really help developers build and then operate their sites, whether that's one small site or one very large website, or whether it's hundreds or sometimes thousands of websites that can all be done from the Experience Factory. And then at the top, you have the Marketing Hub, and it's a suite of products that really enable marketers and business people to drive business results. And so we have products that do things like digital asset management or web personalization with Acquia Lift, journey building with Acquia Journey, and we have different commerce connectors so we can integrate with the Magentos and the BigCommerce and the Elastic Paths of the world. And so combined, we call this an experience platform, or the Acquia experience platform, and it really helps organizations, drive their digital strategy. We have a lot of customers across many different industries. I'm not going to go over these names, but you can see some across these sectors. There is some more here, and we could fill up many more pages, I guess, with logos across these sectors, but we're very proud of the customers that we have, and many of them are very amazing brands. So it's a great testament, not just to Drupal, but also to Acquia, that they choose to work with us. So that's a little bit about Acquia. Of course, you guys are here for Drupal 9, and so I want to segue into the Drupal 9 updates.
Yeah, one more intro before we start. We are going to talk about a lot of things, different tools and processes, and there's a lot of people working on these things in the community, and there's a lot of things that are still to be done. Acquia has been sponsoring my work in the past half year or so to coordinate the work on Drupal 9, so I'm very thankful for being able to do that. And we are working with a lot of people and definitely need more to work with on preparing Drupal 9.
Awesome. Thanks, Gábor. Thanks, everyone that's been contributing to Drupal 9. Obviously, as always, it's the work of many people, not just at Acquia, but obviously in the community. And we'll highlight some of these people throughout this presentation as well. So before we can talk about Drupal 9, I really think we should talk a little bit about how Drupal actually works, or rather, what our innovation model looks like. Like, how do we as a community develop the software? And so that really starts with understanding I guess the release numbers, if you will. And so as you can see in this slide, when we release a version of Drupal, there's kind of a major release number, a minor release number, and a patch release number. And so these patch releases, we do, every 2 or 3 weeks. It's not always every 2 or 3 weeks, but we do them regularly. They come with bug fixes or security fixes, and we can kind of do them quickly as needed. And then the minor version number, like the .7, that's actually a feature release. So our model is sort of the train is leaving the station model, for lack of a better term, where we ship every 6 months, like clockwork, and the features that are ready, they are shipped, and the features that are not ready are not being shipped yet, or are being marked experimental if you want to ship them for, for early testing. And so we do that every 6 months. And as I mentioned, it allows us to continuously innovate because we can add new capabilities every 6 months, and we have been doing so. And then every few years, we increase the major version number. And so that would be like going from Drupal 8 to Drupal 9, that would be a major release. And so, we've been gearing up towards the Drupal 9 release, which is obviously the topic of this webinar. But overall, this model, and it's important to understand this model because it will help explain how we're building Drupal 9 later, but this model has been awesome. It's been working really, really well. And in fact, we've been accelerating. If you look at what's happening in 8.6, that was a fantastic release with all sorts of new capabilities. 8.7, which is the next release, it's not released yet, but it will be released in just a few months. Again, should ship with a lot of great innovations. And so what we've seen throughout the life cycle of Drupal 8 is that we've seen an acceleration of new capabilities coming to the market, if you will. And we've also seen an acceleration of people contributing to Drupal. There's more people contributing to Drupal 8 than several years ago. There's also more organizations contributing to Drupal 8 today than there are several years ago. So overall, this has been very healthy for us and has really given us sort of a rhythm and a cadence and a heartbeat that I believe kind of reaches out to, you know, different corners of the Drupal universe, so to speak, which is quite interesting because, you know, in a way, the core release schedule sets the cadence, but it now starts to affect how organizations innovate around Drupal and how and when they upgrade, you know, their websites and et cetera, et cetera. So that's been very successful, and it's important to know how that works relative to what we're going to do today.
So if we can innovate so much, and if we can introduce all of those new features twice a year, and we can do so many great things, why do we need Drupal 9 at all? Why can't we just keep going on Drupal 8? So I think there's two reasons to that. First of all, we want to clean up our code. We want to clean our own house. We keep adding new things. There are some things in Drupal 8 that don't make sense anymore. We have better ways to solve the same problems, or those problems are not relevant in this age anymore, and we want to remove some things from Drupal 8. But we could do that on our own timeline whenever we want to. So there's not really any pressing reasons there for us to release Drupal 9. A new thing we started with Drupal 8 is we depend on a lot of third-party dependencies that allows us to work with the larger PHP community, work with a lot of different communities, and use best practices from the PHP world in this day and age. It also means, though, that we need to work with those communities and those projects and need to work with their own security support cycles and adapt our cycles to them. So when they make their third-party systems unsupported, we need to act and release updates to our own as well. So let's see an example here. One of the things that we've been working on is updating Drupal 8 to Twig 2 support, optional Twig 2 support, because Drupal 8 it depends on Twig 1 for the theming layer for displaying outputs in Drupal. And Twig 2 came out since, and we wanted to optionally support Twig 2, preparing for requiring Twig 2 in Drupal 9 or later versions. So what we made happen in Drupal 8 is we made Drupal 8 compatible both with Twig 1 and Twig 2, and we're going to release that in 8.7 at the start of May. So with 8.7, you can start using Twig 2 if you want to. You can test out the new version, and we can identify any problems with the new version integrating with Drupal and work out any problems there before Drupal 9 is even released. So we can gradually work on these features, updating third-party dependencies. A much bigger dependency that Drupal has is Symfony. We are currently dependent on Symfony 3. And that's a main driver of releasing Drupal 9 next year. So we're working on optional support for Symfony 4 as well. We are getting very close now, but unfortunately we will not be able to do that yet in 8.7.0. But we are getting very close. We only have a few issues remaining now with optional Symfony 4 support. So we are working on updating our dependencies as optional new versions in Drupal 8.
Awesome. So let me take that a step further and sort of build upon what Gábor was explaining. But so let's look a little bit at how Drupal is actually made and how Drupal 9 specifically is being made. But it's actually being made in Drupal 8. So here's how we work. And here's a visual representation of what Gábor explained. So in a Drupal 8 minor release, like 8.6, we could add new capabilities. For example, we could be adding, and I'm making this up, but we could be adding a new file system layer. And so we would add that as a new block of code at the bottom of the stack. And what we would do at the same time is we would deprecate the old file system implementation, right? So as we add things that replace old things, we mark these old things for removal, or we deprecate them. And so we keep doing that every 6 months with every minor release. And so far that's been working really well. But as Gábor mentioned, that's not all, right? It's not just adding new capabilities and deprecating old capabilities, but we also are dependent on these third-party dependencies. Like Drupal is built on Symfony. As Gábor explained, we use Twig, and there's other third-party components that we use. And so at some point, these third-party components, they go end of life, which means that they won't provide security support for them anymore. And so then we are forced to upgrade these components. Now, upgrading these components might mean that we cannot provide backwards compatibility for them, like we can when we deprecate our old code, because the deprecated code continues to work, right? So if we add new codes, we deprecate the old code, and that what that means in practice is that the old code continues to work, and that the old or existing modules and third-party modules and custom code will all continue to work. So it's really the third-party dependencies that kind of introduces an extra element here. And so effectively, the Drupal 9 release, what it will be is sort of the last version of Drupal 8, where we do two things. One, we remove all of the deprecated codes. And two, we update the third-party dependencies so that we are on a recent version of Symfony and Twig, and versions that will be supported for a long time. So that's effectively how we're building Drupal 9 today, right? So one way to think of it is that we're building Drupal 9 inside of Drupal 8, and that the step from the last version of Drupal 8 to Drupal 9 is really just removing the deprecated codes, updating the third-party dependencies, and yeah, that's it. That will be Drupal 9. And so let's talk a little bit more about that. All right, so Gábor will talk about how you then, if that's how we work, how you can prepare for Drupal 9 and how you can start preparing today.
Yep. So let's talk about that. So how do you know if you use deprecated code? So since we are going to remove deprecated code in Drupal 9, your code, if you are using those deprecated things, will stop working. So if you want to prepare for Drupal 9, you can already stop using deprecated code. So let's first talk about what it means when we deprecate something. So let's see this example of file unmanaged copy is a function that we used to have in Drupal 8, and we still have it in Drupal 8. And that allows you to copy a file from a source to a destination. You give it a path of a source and a path of a destination, and it copies the file. And that's been working quite well for us. It still works in Drupal 8.7. But in Drupal 8.7, we decided instead to introduce a file system service that implements the file system interface. And the file system interface has a copy method that takes a source and a destination and copies the file from the source to the destination. So it looks very similar, but there are various benefits to this implementation compared to the global function. We have this service container that you can get the service from. It has an interface that documents all the file system methods that you can use. You don't need to poke around in function names and try to find which functions you may want to use. So there's a documented interface that you can use. This service can be swapped out and the service container. So if you need to do something special in your setup with the file system service, you want to log file system operations, or you want to implement a distributed file system or something, you can swap out the service and implement these methods differently. We can mock the file system service, so we can test file operations better without actually needing those files to appear on the file system. So we can do a lot of good things with this, and it matches with the style of Drupal coding standards elsewhere, so it's familiar to how Drupal works otherwise. So that's why we do this change. But if we would just remove file unmanaged copy and now require you to use this new file service, then all of the code that currently exists that uses file unmanaged copy would break. None of your contributed modules or custom code would work anymore. So we don't do that. What we do instead, as explained on the next slide, is we keep file unmanaged copy around, And we do two things to file unmanaged copy. We add documentation for the function that says this is deprecated in Drupal 8.7, will be removed before Drupal 9, meaning that it will not be included in Drupal 9 anymore. And we tell you what to use instead. And then we have a trigger error call in the function that does basically the same thing. It tells you what happened here and what to do instead. And we also link to a change record that explains why we did this, what's the context of this change, why is this better, what are the other changes related to this change, etc. And we also link to that in the PHP doc comment. And then we provide a backwards compatible implementation of this function. So we do call the file system service with the copy method and catch the exception if it happens. So if you keep calling file unmanaged copy in your custom code or with your modules that you use on your site, nothing's going to break. It's still going to work. What's going to happen, though, is we now trigger that error, and you can catch that error and log that error if you want to. It will not do anything bad on your site by default because it's silenced. And if you analyze this code or you use an IDE that supports tracking deprecations like PHP Storm, then it will tell you that you're using a deprecated function and you can act on the deprecation based on the documentation. So this is how we deprecate things. We say this is going to be removed and this is what to use instead. And then we built some tools to find all the deprecations. So Matt Gleiman did fantastic work on a tool that's called Drupal Check. That's very simple. You just download the tool. It's a FAR executable. It's a PHP archive that you can directly run with PHP. And you can run it on whatever code base you have. Here we are running it on the path module in Core. I'm going to show you that the path module in Core currently has a bunch of deprecated code being used. So as we said, we are still working on Drupal 9. We are not done yet with Drupal 9, so we are still using some of our own deprecated code. That's what happens. You can use the same tool to run it on the whole core code base or your own builds, your own sites. You can put this tool into a continuous integration system, into a deployment system, and run this tool against your code base. So you can track your to-do list for Drupal 9 readiness. And then you can...
By the way, Gábor, sorry. I've actually used this tool on my sites, you know, just as an anecdote here, on my own custom modules that I built for my blog. And I mean, it works today and it's great. Like, as you can see in the output, it will say things like, you know, the function db queries no longer used or will no longer be used in Drupal 9. And so what I did is I literally went into my module to the line number that was specified by Drupal Check. You know, oftentimes, like I would say in 95% of the time, in my case, it was a quick search and replace, like the file system example. And literally in 10 minutes, my site was Drupal 9 compatible, at least, you know, to the best of our knowledge today. And so it's a great little tool. And yeah, people can use it today to start making their modules Drupal 9 ready.
Yeah, not everything will be doable in 10 minutes, but this tool definitely helps you define a to-do list that you can work on. And then we have documentation, of course, of all the things that we deprecated. And if you go to api.drupal.org, there is a link to the deprecated things. And you can filter that down to, for example, whatever was deprecated in 8.5.x. You can look through the list. It tells you what to do instead, etc. You can click in whatever you want to read more of, and then there's the documentation on what to do with that deprecation. So you can review all the deprecations we did here and even deprecations of our third-party dependencies that your code may be using. So it's a very handy reference to look for documentation on deprecations as well.
Awesome. So, you know, before I transition to the next slides, I kind of maybe want to back up for a second and kind of summarize what we've talked about so far. So effectively, what we're doing through this deprecation system, if you will, is that we can innovate in Drupal 8. We can deprecate things that we will drop once we go to Drupal 9. But what it allows you to do, if you're if you're an end user of Drupal, a developer, you can already start updating your site to be sort of compatible with Drupal 9. So, and that's new. That's a completely new way of working for us, because in Drupal 7, when we went from 7 to 8, it was much more of a big bang approach, so to speak. Like, and there wasn't this option to gradually migrate or update. And the beauty of this model is that if all the contributed modules and all of your custom modules, if they actually do this and make sure that they don't use deprecated code, then a module will be able to run on the latest version of Drupal 8, as well as Drupal 9 without any modifications really. And so that's pretty powerful, because it means that the upgrade from 8 to 9 should be really simple compared to the upgrade from 7 to 8, right? And so these tools will help a lot. There's another tool that we're building, which is not a command line tool, but it's sort of an in-browser tool. It's part of Drupal. Right now, it's being developed as a contributed module, but effectively what it does is it provides like more of a graphical user interface on top of Drupal's scan or Drupal check. And so it will show you for all the modules that you have installed on your website, both contributed modules that you may have downloaded from Drupal.org, as well as your custom modules that you built just for your site. It will tell you if it's ready for Drupal 9, meaning to the best of our ability, right now. And that should be a pretty handy tool, because now maybe as a less technical site owner, site builder, you can actually run this tool very easily, and it will give you, some sort of report that gives you, let's call it a readiness assessment of your Drupal site as it relates to Drupal 9. And then if you're a little bit more technical, you can actually view all of the deprecations that you have to work on. So that would be something your developers or your developer can use to prepare your site for Drupal 9. And so it's a nice visual addition on top of a command line tool that's a little bit more, let's say, accessible for non-developers. All right, so we're planning to build this. It's currently a prototype, but we're working on this right now. And as I said, it's a contributed module, but it's something that we should consider to include in a future version of Drupal 8, so that everybody can go in and see, like, hey, how ready am I? How complex would this upgrade be? And if the contributed module ecosystem, works on deprecating or, kind of updating their code to not use deprecated code, it could be, fairly straightforward upgrade. So completely different than going from 7 to 8. Going from 8 to 9 should be a lot easier.
Yeah, so here we've had a separate section for your own custom code, because that's something that you can act on. That's what Dries updated in 10 minutes for himself. For the rest of the code, though, you probably don't have direct access to fix them. So let's walk through what you can do about those things. So for Drupal Core itself, it will by itself become Drupal 9, so you don't really need to do anything there. You just keep Drupal 8 Core up to date, and then 8.9 will turn into 9.0 and remove the deprecations and update the third-party dependencies. For contributed modules, we suggest you keep them up to date, as maintainers will work on updating to remove the deprecations. And you should work with the maintainers to make sure that those deprecations are removed. And there are some tools on Drupal.org for contributed projects to help with that. So if we move on to the next slide, then there's the code example for Drupal.org. Each project on Drupal.org may contain a Drupal CI.yaml file, which governs how the testing system, how the CI system runs tests for the project. So you can either commit changes to your Drupal CI.yaml in your project, or you can submit patches and issues against your project and run the Drupal CI system in custom ways on top of your projects. And there's two different tools here that help you with deprecation analysis and testing. First, you can run the PHP stand static analyzer on your codebase. So that looks for the deprecated annotations that are in the documentation for our deprecated code. And that's the same tool that Drupal Check uses, and it's the same tool that our upgrade status dashboard is planning to use in the background, so you should get the same results. And the other choice that you have, or the other option you have, is to run your tests in a way that fails with use of deprecated code. So if you say suppress deprecations false is kind of a double negative, but that's how the syntax is here, then the testing system will not suppress deprecations and it will fail tests if you're using deprecated code. So that means that your test suite in your Drupal.org project will only pass if you're not using anything deprecated. The completeness of your test suite basically limits how effective that method is for deprecation testing. So the more complete your test coverage for your project, the more useful that method of finding deprecation is going to be. So the two methods are somewhat complementary. So you can use both the static analysis method and failing on tests if you want to be absolutely sure that you get rid of all the deprecations. There's one thing to note for Drupal.org projects that we explained on the next slide, is the timelines of when the deprecations will actually happen. So it might sound like that is the best idea to act on deprecations immediately. So the example of the file unmanaged copy that we've shown earlier is being deprecated in 8.7.0, which is released in May. But if you immediately remove file unmanaged copy from your projects, that also means, and start using the replacement that got introduced in 8.7, that also means that the code will not be compatible with 8.6 anymore, because the replacement for file unmanaged copy is not yet available in 8.6. So, you need to keep in mind that contributed modules will not be practically up to date always for deprecations. It's not practical because that would mean that they drop support for core versions that the community otherwise supports. The community made a very conscious decision to support core versions for 12 months. So when 8.7 comes out, we will drop support for 8.5, giving people more time to upgrade, update from 8.6. So contributed modules will be more likely following releases from one version apart, or maybe even longer if they need more time. All right, and then the third component after updating core and updating contributed modules is what to do with third-party dependencies. So as I said earlier, we updated 8.7 to support Twig 2. So what you can also do is you can switch to optionally supported updated dependencies. So for example, you can try Twig 2 with Drupal 8.7 and see what else fails with your themes and your modules and your other integration code in your own projects. And that also means that you're getting even more closer to how Drupal 9 is going to look like. We're still working on updating other dependencies, and we're not making promises right now whether we're going to update to a certain version of PHP unit or CK editor or some other dependency. We are exploring what our requirements are for updates and what makes the most sense. We will not update dependencies just for the sake of updating them, only if there's some benefit for us in terms of security support cycles or features or performance or some other means. So this is the third way of keeping closer to Drupal 9.
Awesome, thank you. Obviously, we keep making progress on 8, and our goal is to release Drupal 9 in June of 2020. That's our current thinking. And so going backwards from that date, 6 months prior, given the 6-month release cycle, would be 8.8, which is currently set to be released in December 2019. It's kind of really going to be the last Drupal 8 release. And so what we've decided to do, is to stop deprecating things, after 8.8, so that people and organizations can get ready to update their modules to Drupal 9, and so that we also don't obviously break modules. And so at some point, we're going to enter this stabilization phase, if you will, where the focus of not just the core developers, but hopefully the community of contributors is also going to focus towards the, getting ready for Drupal 9 period. And so I know this is probably a lot of information, but effectively what we're saying is that as long as you stay current with Drupal 8 upgrades, you're actually starting to get parts of Drupal 9. And so updating to Drupal 9 is going to be a set of small steps. Every time you run an update and you run update.php on a Drupal 8 site, you actually get more and more ready for Drupal 9. And eventually the step from 8.8 to 9 should also be as simple as just running update.php. So again, completely different scenario than the migration or update from 7 to 8. I haven't really mentioned this yet, although we've shown it in the slide, but our plan is to end of life Drupal 8 in November 2021. So that means that once we release Drupal 9, you will have about a year and a half to migrate to Drupal 9. But again, it should be easy because it's a kind of a similar to a minor version upgrade. The reason why we have to end of life Drupal 8 in November 2021 is because of the dependency on some of these components, and most notably Symfony 3. So Symfony 3 will go end of life, which means there won't be any security updates for Symfony 3 as it stands. And so obviously as a project, we need to make sure that everybody is off Drupal 8 by the time that happens and onto Drupal 9 by that time, so that you can benefit from Symfony 4 or Symfony 5, which will be supported by the upstream or downstream project, however you look at it. So that's the plan for end of lifing Drupal 8. Drupal 7 was originally going to be end of life earlier, because we do support only 2 versions. Technically, we would end of life Drupal 7 the day that Drupal 9 was released. But we've made an exception, or we decided to make a change from what we've done historically. And we're extending the Drupal 7 security support by also 1.5 years. So Drupal 7 will be supported by the community also until I think it's Q4 2021. And that's a big deal, of course, given that there are still quite a few organizations on Drupal 7. Now, even after the community stops supporting Drupal 7, there will be an extended vendor support program where organizations, like Acquia, can choose to offer even longer support for Drupal 7. And that's through a collaboration with the security team. So that allows these vendors to backport security, security patches to Drupal 7. So effectively what it means is that if you're on Drupal 7, you should be good for many, many more years. Especially if you're willing to, like if you have to go beyond 2021, if you're willing to pay to opt into a program like that, you should be good for a very long time. So there's really no rush to move off Drupal 7. I just want to make that very clear, because it's supported and will be supported and then will be supported possibly for many, many more years through a commercial program as well. So that's a little bit about that. And so it's exciting because it will mean that at some point, everybody's going to be in a single version of Drupal versus multiple branches. So I guess to recap, I know, Gábor, if you want to kick this off or if you want me to kick this slide off, but let me actually start and then let's alternate. You know, Drupal is basically, Drupal 8 has a new innovation model with twice a year cadence of releases where we innovate. It's something that we'll keep doing even after Drupal 9 is released, and I think should be exciting to you know, a lot of users of Drupal.
Yeah, once Drupal 9 is released, we'll move over the half-yearly feature releases to Drupal 9. So Drupal 9 will start receiving new features and Drupal 8 will not. And then updating from Drupal 8 to 9 will be easy, especially if you keep up to date with Drupal 8 as we release new core versions and as deprecations are being resolved.
Yeah, and the best way to prepare for Drupal 9, if you're on Drupal 8, is to just keep Drupal 8 updated, run the 6 months updates or the annual updates, and also, you know, use some of the tools that we're making available, you know, through the community to, you know, check deprecations. You know, start looking at your custom code and remove deprecations and kind of evolve along with Drupal 8 towards Drupal 9.
Yeah, if you are building Drupal 8 sites now, then you can build in these tools and check your code as you are writing it to make sure that you're not using deprecated stuff as well. For Drupal 7 sites, there's no reason to wait for Drupal 9 because it's essentially Drupal 8 cleaned up. So you can hop on Drupal 8 and then start using Drupal 8 the same way that others are already on there.
Yeah, and that's actually a great point because I get this question asked quite a bit, like organizations or users asking like, well, should I skip a release? Like, should I go from 7 to 9? And the answer is like, no, because there's really no benefit to skipping a release. Like, you know, maybe it was the case in the past, you know, people went from Drupal 5 to Drupal 7, skipping 6. At that point, that made sense because it avoided sort of a complex upgrade. But now, once you're on 8, the migration to 9 should be easy. So there's really no benefit to skipping a release. So the faster you get onto Drupal 8, the faster you get to take advantage of Drupal 8's new innovation model, you know, and so really no reason to wait. And last but not least, if you're on Drupal 7 and you're happy with Drupal 7, you know, you're in good shape, honestly, because it is supported by the community. And after the community stops supporting Drupal 7, there will be commercial support provided by vendors. And I can tell that, you know, putting on my Acquia hat, that Acquia will offer this to our customers. It's important that we make sure our customers, if you're a customer, that you will be supported and that you will receive security fixes through Acquia. So if you're on 7 and you don't want to migrate to Drupal 8 or you can't migrate to Drupal 8 right now, don't panic, I would say. You're well supported for a long time to come.
Yeah, the application period for the vendor support program is currently open, so we don't know the exact list of vendors, but there's going to be several vendors offering support.
That's right. And more details to follow once that program is sort of officially rolled out. So, you know, this is a timeline that puts all of the different dates, dependencies into a single slide. Might be a good one to print out or something. I'm not gonna repeat what we said, but I think one of the key messages that is worth repeating is that the big deal about Drupal 9 is that it shouldn't be a big deal. You know, you get it and you get it in an easy incremental way. So that is what we had. And so with that, I think we can transition into the Q&A part of the webinar.
Yes, thank you all so much for your questions. We don't have a ton of time, but we'll try and get to as many as we can. So the first question, if Drupal 9 is essentially an upgraded version of Drupal 8, does it mean that Drupal 8 contrib modules will work in Drupal 9, or will they need to be rewritten?
It's a great question. Gábor, you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, so if the Drupal 8 module is not using any of the deprecated APIs in Drupal 8, then it will immediately work with Drupal 9. If it uses some of the deprecated APIs in Drupal 8, then it will need changes only for the parts that it is using, the deprecated parts. And as you've seen from the Drupal Check example in the path module, there's some relatively well-contained things that need to be updated. There's no rewrite needed at all, definitely not. So that's why we try to emphasize that the definition of Drupal 9 is basically Drupal 8 minus deprecated stuff and the updated third-party dependencies. There's no rewrites needed. It's basically Drupal 8 cleaned up and supported for a longer time.
Okay. All right, next question. So I know we've been getting a lot of questions around Drupal 7 to Drupal 8 to Drupal 9 upgrades. And I think we covered this, but can you reiterate again? Can we migrate directly to 7 or 7 to 9? Or do we have to migrate to first to 8 and then to Drupal 9?
Yeah, I can take this one. And Gábor, feel free to chime in as well. But you should be able to migrate from 7 to 9. Yeah, but that should be possible. Obviously, it's not something that we have a fully tested migration path for, because Drupal 9 doesn't exist yet. So I say that a little bit like in theory versus in practice, but definitely the goal is to support organizations or individuals migrating their sites from 7 to 9. So if you wanted to skip 8, you can, but again, there's really not a compelling reason to.
All right, next question. Any anticipated performance improvements of significance in Drupal 9 over Drupal 8?
It's a great question. So I can answer that. So again, if we make performance improvements throughout the Drupal 8 development cycle, you get them as part of Drupal 8. Now, one thing that will happen is if we drop deprecated codes, that means we, shed some weight, if you will, that should technically, or could translate, depending on your setup, should translate into a more lightweight code base, which should technically be a little bit faster. On top of that, if we do swap out third-party dependencies with a newer version of the third-party dependencies, we get the advantage of the updated version. So, depending on how we use these things as well, but like, let's say that Twig 2 is significantly faster than Twig 1, you would get the benefits of sort of these third-party dependency upgrades. So Drupal 9, again, we don't know yet because we don't have Drupal 9 yet, and we haven't actually dropped the deprecated code, but sort of, academically, it should be a little bit faster than the last version of Drupal 8, with the caveat that who knows what the third-party dependencies introduce. They may slow us down a little bit, but just the notion of dropping codes and shedding deprecated code should mean that we could technically be a little bit faster.
All right, thank you.
Dries, can you move back to the timeline slide?
Yep.
Great, the summary timeline.
Oh, let's see. I think I'm moving in the wrong direction. Hold on. Trying to move backwards in Keynote. Might be coming. There you go. This one, Gábor?
Yep, thank you.
Gábor, did you want to touch on this, or should we continue with questions?
No, I've just seen people requested to see this because there's a lot of key information on here.
Awesome. All All right, so next question. Are there any structural changes between 8 and 9 and any new tools that are going to be introduced?
Gábor, you want to take that one?
I don't believe there's any structural changes so far that we're planning, but there's more than a year for us to figure out if we need to or want to. Anyway, if we make some change, we'll definitely weigh the cost benefits of whether we gain by applying new structural approaches to how we do things. There's definitely a lot of efforts, for example, into making Drupal integrate better with Composer, but that's not necessarily tied to Drupal 8 or 9 because we can do that on an independent timescale.
Okay. Is there a media library in Drupal 9?
Yeah, there will be one, hopefully. So again, there is a media library in Drupal 8, actually, as an experimental module, and we have made amazing progress, actually, between 8.5 and 8.6, but also now between 8.6 and 8.7, which is soon to be released. We've made a ton of progress on the media library, and so this comes down again to this notion of continuous innovation. And once the media library is stable in 8, organizations should be able to start using that. And that capability will carry over into Drupal 9. So if you think about it, like how will Drupal 9.0 compare to 8.0, then yeah, there will be all these new features that weren't in the initial version of Drupal 8, including a media library, because when we launched Drupal 8, the initial version of Drupal 8 didn't have a media library. And now we have an experimental media library already in 8. And hopefully by the time we release Drupal 9, that will be stable. So yes, there should be a media library in Drupal 9. And it's the same thing with Layout Builder, for example. I saw a few questions about Layout Builder, something that we're working on. And we might actually be able to get it stable by 8.7. So we're still working really hard on getting the Layout Builder stable. But again, knock on wood, but it should be stable by Drupal 9 if it's not stable in 8.7. So you get all these innovations throughout the Drupal 8 lifecycle.
All right, thank you. We'll do a couple more questions. What major new features do we have in Drupal 9?
Well, Gábor, you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, that's a nice question, because what's going to happen, as shown on this slide, is on June 3rd, 2020, we plan to release Drupal 9, and at the same time we plan to release Drupal 8.9. And 8.9 is going to be the last release of 8, according to our current plans, if all goes well and the timelines. And the two of them will contain the same features. The only difference between the two, according to our plans, is the removal of deprecated code and the updating of the third-party dependencies. So in that sense, 9.0 will not have any new features. However, as we explained, we have this half-a-year cadence of feature releases. And once 9.0 is released, the only version we will keep building features for is going to be 9. So we'll not have any new features in 8 anymore. The only release we're going to have new features in is going to be 9. So the answer is yes, we'll have new features in 9, not in 9.0, but in 9.1, 9.2, etc. And we will not have new features anymore in 8.
Yeah, so I can add a little bit to that. So one of the things that we did, I think it was either just before or just after we released Drupal 8, is we spend a lot of time sort of on product management, and we surveyed the community, and we've talked to a lot of people, and so we identified sort of things that we wanted to do throughout the Drupal 8 development cycle. And so one of the things we said we would do is really focus on making Drupal easier for content creators. And so that has translated in us starting what we call initiatives. And so we have a media initiative, which we touched upon. We have a layout builder initiative that we touched upon. We also have a workflow initiative that we've done a lot of great work on. We are working on updates to the administration UI. We've worked on making Drupal easier to evaluate, and all of this throughout Drupal 8. So we have the out-of-the-box initiative. We have worked a lot on making Drupal a great solution for like headless or decoupled deployments. So we have a whole API first initiative. I mean, like we've done so much stuff throughout the Drupal 8 release cycle. And so once we start working on Drupal 9, we'll go through a similar process where we're going to try and figure out what are the key strategic things that we need to work on throughout Drupal 9. You know, let's say we wanted to make Drupal, you know, even easier to use by content creator. What would be the next thing to add? Or what would we try to improve? And similarly, how could we help developers be more efficient with Drupal 9? And so what kinds of improvements can we make to configuration management or Composer? Like all of that will start up again, where we will define sort of the strategic direction, you know, sort of, you know, after or just before we release Drupal 9. And then you get all of that innovation in Drupal 9, throughout Drupal 9. And so it's almost like we're flipping the model upside down, right? If you think about most organizations or commercial organizations, they do these big bang releases with all these new features. We're actually building the next version in the open and try to give you the goodies as soon as they're ready.
Okay, great. We are just going to do one more question. Will the Acquia Lightning distribution continue to be supported through Drupal 9?
Yeah, it will be, yeah. It's actually a great way to try Drupal 9 capabilities through Lightning. So Lightning gives you everything in Drupal 8, plus a whole bunch of other things, and sometimes actually harnessed a little bit more. Like they've added, you know, additional maybe documentation or additional patches that aren't necessarily in Drupal 8 yet, that are already bundled into Lightning. So Lightning is a great way to get a glimpse of what's coming, along with, you know, other, you know, capabilities that are bundled in. So I know there's a lot of questions, and I know we ran out of time, but one thing that I'll do is I'll try to talk about this more in my, it's called the Dries note, which is kind of a funny name. I didn't give it that name, but it's my keynote presentation at DrupalCon in just 3 weeks. And then maybe Gábor and I can try and also write a blog post or several blog posts where we will try and answer as many of your questions as we can, right? Like we can look at them and then we can try and kind of answer them that way, because we certainly recognize that these are important questions and that people need to make plans and figure things out, and maybe you know, explain to colleagues and peers what they're going to do and when to upgrade. And so we will try and provide more guidance through you know, other channels as well. So if you want to subscribe, you can subscribe to Drupal.org. You can subscribe to my personal blog. You can subscribe to Gábor's blog. You can subscribe to Acquia.com. Like, we'll try to use different means to keep you updated in how things evolve, and we'll try to help as much as we can.
All right. Thank you all again for attending our webinar today, and big thanks to Dries and Gábor. As I previously said, the slides and the recording of this webinar will be sent to you via email within the next few days. And additionally, we have some related assets on Drupal 9 that will be provided in that follow-up. And we do plan to share more content around Drupal 9 in the future that we will share out. If you have any additional questions, please send them to marketing@theacquiateam.com. And thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you.